All right, class. So more the modern day theory of evolution stuff came from Charles Darwin and a person named Alfred Wallace. So both of these guys were doing similar kinds of things around the same time. So this is kind of like 1830s to 1840s ish in time. Okay, and Darwin was uh, working with lots of plants and animals. And I'm going to show you in the next lecture, I'm going to show you the voyage of the HMS Beagle and where Darwin went with all of that and talk a little bit about that. So that was a major influence on his idea of evolution and the natural world. So lots of plants, lots of animals that Darwin was working with, and I'll show you some of that with the next video. Wallace was primarily looking at insects. He was collected and studied a lot of insects in South America. So he too, didn't do the HMS Beagle, but Wallace also did some world travel and kind of looked at what do we have and compare it back to what we're used to seeing at home. And now the biggest thing from both of these people, again, is the idea that organisms adapt to their environment. Right, so that's not new because I told you that back with even Lamarck earlier in the 1800s, late 1700s. Some naturalists were getting this idea that organisms must adapt to their environment. So that's not a new novel idea that's attributed to Darwin and Wallace because that's been around for a while now. But the thing was the mechanism, right? The idea of what's causing these organisms to adapt. Now with Lamarck, we mentioned this was something called inheritance of acquired characters, which I told you was not correct. It can't be correct because it's not genetically influenced, right? So the mechanism here with Darwin and Wallace is natural selection. And the interesting thing with this is, with natural selection that both Darwin and Wallace independently came up with this idea. Right? They may not have called it exactly the same thing. They may not have even called it natural selection themselves, but the descriptions of what they both came up with for this mechanism, right? The how, right? How are organisms adapting to their environment? The natural selection thing was independently derived from both of these guys. So again, normal popular media and stuff, we always kind of hear Charles Darwin, evolution, natural selection. And he gets most of that credit because in science and biology, you publish it first and you kind of get credit for it. So he kind of gets most of the credit because of that. But Wallace also did some publications talking about these adaptations and how nature can do this selection and cause these adaptations. All right, so that's kind of the new big idea coming from these guys is the idea of natural selection being the mechanism that's driving these organisms to adapt. And then there's one last thing I wanted to mention to you with Darwin. And sometimes this is attributed to, several other people as well, even maybe pre-Darwin, but most of the time we give this phrase to Darwin. What he called his adapting to the environment was descent with modifications. Right? Descent with modifications. So, descent here, it's just talking about inheritance, right? It's just talking about our, parents having offspring, and then they have offspring, and they have offspring, and you keep going and keep going, and how we're passing on genes through that descent, through that lineage. Okay, and then of course modifications, meaning we're going to have changes, right? And we started this unit where I was telling you that evolution, our way of thinking of evolution, should be accumulating adaptive traits. So those adaptive traits are some of these modifications that are getting made. You know, you can make modifications that may not be very good, and those typically are not going to be inherited, right? So if there's a modification that makes something not run as fast, so it can't get away from predators, then it's not living as much, it's not reproducing as much, and that gene doesn't really get inherited by very many offspring, right? So those adaptive changes are these modifications. So this is kind of how Darwin himself described this process was, you know, we make these changes, nature is selecting that there's some advantage to these changes, and then those changes are inherited by offspring. So we get this descending lineage of organisms with that modification.